Thanks everybody for attending this this webinar. We are very pleased to have today Javier de la Rosa presenting, I think, a very interesting topic. This is, as you know, is organized by its chair on artificial intelligence and language technology at the its center. So this is a series of webinars we organize with relevant researchers, I think, very interesting researchers in all areas of language technology, from large language models to machine translations to speech technology. This is the ones that we organized this year, this annual year, and at this time today we have Javier de la Rosa. We have some other presentations, at least one per month, almost until June next year. And today we are very excited and also interested to know about the Mímir Project, which is a project that is led in the Artificial Intelligence Lab in the National Library of Norway. And Javier de la Rosa is going to present this impact on the copyrighted materials, which is, I think, is a very hot topic right now. It's about, especially in Europe, where we have all these laws on artificial intelligence and data acts, etc., about what we can do or not with large language models, especially for research, but for commercial purposes. So Javier has been studying in Spain, in the UNED, and also in some other places in Sevilla, for instance, a master in Sevilla, and also he has been working in Stanford, also in Ontario, University of Western Ontario, and he is now working in the Artificial Intelligence Lab in Norway. So we are very curious about the presentation he's going to present today, and so the floor is yours. Whenever you like, Javier, you can present your topic.
Thank you so much, Herman, for the presentation, and also to Aritz for the invitation. Let me share my screen real quick. You hear me fine, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, now you should be able to see my slides as well. So I'll
yeah,
start.
Well, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about the Mímir Project, which is a project that we've been carrying out in Norway for a number of months, with the objective of assessing the impact of including copyrighted materials, specifically books and newspapers, as the training sets for large language models. What kind of performance degradation or improvements we can see when we add them. As a little bit of background, we are now living in a very hectic time with the revolution of large language models and natural language processing. We've been seeing huge progress, especially since the eruption of ChatGPT. And we also know that for training these beasts, we need vast, massive amounts of textual data, which poses very serious legal and ethical questions regarding the sources used to train these models and the copyright status of these materials as well. If we take a look briefly, excuse me, to the timeline, we have like a moment that was the start of this revolution, and I think that we can agree that the release of ChatGPT was really like an after and before moment in AI. Even though before ChatGPT we had models like the BERT series of model, T5 models, encoder models. We also had GPT-1 and 2. It wasn't until this point that the first successful public-facing AI chat model was released to the public. So the general public understood that AI could be actually something they could benefit from. A few months later, in January of 2023, OpenAI released the GPT-4 with they claim human-like capabilities. And it is true that with the release of this model, we saw a huge jump in the reasoning, quote-unquote, reasoning abilities of the coder-only models. But right after ChatGPT and the release of the OpenAI GPT-4 model happened, a lot of different lawsuits started to happen. Authors guilds and right holders associations started to come together to sue the very companies creating these models. But it wasn't only against OpenAI, it was also against Anthropic, Google, Alphabet, Meta, and the lawsuits just grew and grew and grew. Almost unbearable. In Norway, in November of 2023, just about a year after the release of ChatGPT, the right holders organizations of Norway, representing both the publisher housing, the publishing houses, but also the newspaper associations, they wrote a letter to the government demanding some compensation for the use of their material in the training of large language models. The letter actually looked a bit like this. I cannot show exactly how the letter was in complete form because it was also part of the letter, the amount of money they were actually requesting the government. But it basically say, okay, we want to get compensated if you're going to use our material, which is copyright protected in the training of generative, specifically generative language models. We want some sort of compensation, right? So on the basis of this, the government said, okay, you are probably right, but before we can establish a way of compensating the authors via these right holder organizations, we need to know exactly what the value of your material is. What is that your material is actually bringing to the performance and to the performance of these large language models. So in January of 2024, the project Mímir was born. The Ministry of Culture of Norway gave us a mandate directly to the National Library of Norway. So we had to, in a period of 6 months, we have to create a consortium working together with different universities, working together with a high-performance computer center there, working together also with Lumi, which is another supercomputer. And in a matter of 6 months, we had to create the consortium, build the data sets, come up with an experimental plan, run the experiments, train the models, create evaluation suites, run the evaluations, analyze the results, and write the reports, all in 6 months. It was a very interesting period of my life, I would say. So the actual mandate from the ministry covered like 3 different points. The first one is about examining the value of copyright protected material in the training of Norwegian generative language models, also assess the basis for a possible compensation scheme, and then prepare the proposals for this very compensation scheme. It's only objective 1 within the mandate of this project that Mímir Project is all about. Objectives number 2 and 3 are outside of Mímir. We're just trying to inform the conversations that the ministry and the National Library and the right holders organizations are having, but we're not going to propose specific quantities based on the results we are getting. We actually advocate against that. The methodology is as usual. First, we need to gather a very diverse corpus. We need to assemble a very diverse corpus, which is a task in itself because Norwegian is only spoken by 7 million people. and we don't have a lot of material. A big chunk of that material is actually under copyright, so we need to resort to using other sources like internet crawl data, and then we get into the discussion of whether internet material is copyrighted or not. It actually is by default, but the purpose of this project was to analyze the material for which we had access permissions. We cannot legally enforce any copyright for the material that is open in the internet. However, we have laws like legal deposit laws in Norway, by which everything that is written in a region in Norway needs to be deposited at the National Library. So those materials we have control of, so we can decide whether to include them or not. And we actually have an extensive catalog with all the metadata to be able to include or exclude these materials. For the internet data, because it's already publicly accessible, we know that it might be copyrighted, but it's not part of the definition we're using for copyright in this study. Then we need to come up with a plan for model training, train a number of models using different ablations on the data, and finally run some evaluation tasks. For the data, we decided to create two different data sets. First, something we are calling Mímir base, and then something we are calling Mímir extended. The idea for Mímir base was to create a data set of mainly Norwegian data, which the intention was for it to be free of access without any restrictions. It would include also books in the public domain and also newspapers that for which we had an agreement with the right holders, also publication from the public sector, from the government, other data sets arranged by what we call the language bank, and also from the web. And then Mímir extended could be a superset of Mímir base that would include all the contents in base plus the material under copyright, given the definition that I gave above. Problem is that even though we thought there were no restrictions and that we had some agreements in place, turns out that there were actually restrictions and agreements that, for example, the National Library had signed with right holders of several newspapers. They were designed for an era that predates generative models. They were designed for the purpose, it's called Språktechnologi formal in Norwegian, and that translates roughly to language technology purposes. They sign agreements so you can use these materials to improve language technology for Norway. Now, when the generative wave of AI started to happen, they saw that the nature of these models might threaten their way of actually making a living. So midway through the project, they decided to pull off of these agreements. That was really bad news because we designed Mímir base thinking that we could probably release not only the data, but also all the models we trained based on Mímir base. Now we cannot do that because they pulled off from the agreements. The models have been already trained, and the data we need to strip it out of around 1 billion words to be able to release it. So it's a extra effort we have to do. The problem is that we're not going to be able to release all the models and all the data that we had. In terms of documents as words, these data sets are kind of small if you compare them to the trillion tokens, trillion words data sets that are out there for English and Chinese and the like. So we have for base around 40 billion words, and then for extended is a bit more than double that. The composition of these data sets is explained in this table. you will see that there are also like 4 different columns, right? There is one first step in which we download everything, depending on the source. We have all the books in the catalog of the National Library. We have Cultura X, Digimanus, which is a collection of OCR manuscripts. Also, we have evaluation reports from the government, the high performance language technology 1.2. That's a European funded project. We have, there is a misspelling there, I think. There is also Love Data, which is data about the law in Norway, which is also supposed to be open. We have Målfrid, which is a collection of government documents. And then we have open newspapers, more documents for the parliament. We included some of the English books in the PG19, which is the Project Gutenberg dump of 2019. We included some coding as well from Start Coder for those that had an open license. Wikipedia dumps, of course, but also the copyrighted books and the copyrighted newspapers that we had in our collection. In the pipeline, the first step is to convert all of this to JSON lines format, and then we clean it and deduplicate it. And then before building extended and base, we weight by language because the Norwegian is kind of small. We have seen in other projects that complementing our data sets with other Nordic languages like Swedish and Danish mostly usually improve the model. So we establish some threshold for the amount of other languages that we want to include, specifically coming from the internet material. So that's the reason why these amounts are actually a bit different from the clean material to the extended. We are weighting by language in a way that makes it fair. We calculated perplexity models to weight all of this. So the amount of non-Norwegian data was not overwhelming the amount of Norwegian data. We created our own perplexity models as well to properly assess the content of books and newspapers. And we also created a perplexity model for the government documents. In that way, we were able to create like different segments of the data. So we have one segment of the data for which the perplexity is very high, one segment for which the perplexity is kind of medium, and then one segment for which the perplexity is very low. The idea with this segmentation was that you train on the noisy data first, and then you get cleaner data as you progress the training, with the idea of getting a really good performing model at the end of the training steps. This is just a tree map of how the Mímir extended, which is the superset of everything, the tree map with all the different categories, right? We see that a big chunk of it is internet with Cultura X and HPLT. You also have the books, out of which like maybe 80% is actually in copyright. Then you have newspapers, code, Wikipedia, and then another section with all the other government laws, reports, and documents like that. Once we had established the base and the extended data sets, we also wanted to dig a bit deeper into the nature and the genre of these data set to see which one was impacting the performance more. So we decided to create ablations out of these configurations. For example, just considering only the books, only the newspapers, the copyrighted books and the copyrighted newspapers, both books and newspapers, excluding all the internet material that we included as well. Only factual information, that would be, for example, newspapers and nonfiction, then distinguishing between fiction books and nonfiction books, and also analyzing a little bit the translation nature of the books. These are the sizes here, as expected. Delta, as we call them, Delta Corpora, for example, for fiction books, is actually one of the smallest, followed by translated books, and then the group with the books and newspapers is the biggest, because that's actually where the the largest amount of material existing for Norwegian actually is. And then we train models on all of this. We train around 17 different models of 7 billion parameters, which is around 25 times smaller than GPT-3. And this still took like 2,000 and 70,000 GPU hours to train. We split the training among 3 different institutions. We did some training using Google TPUs. We used the Idun cluster, which is a public-private cluster owned by the Technical University in Trondheim. And then we also used the Lumi supercomputer. University of Oslo, which was also part of the consortium, mostly used the Lumi computer, and then NTNU, the university, also used Idun and Lumi. We use 3 different infrastructures. We use 3 different code bases / frameworks for this. So to make sure that the trainings were all converging in the same direction, we first trained 3 control models. Each institution trained a control model of around 1.5 billion, all based on Llama or Mistral. And then we observed the loss of the trainings. And then we saw that at the end of, I think it was like 10,000 steps or so, we saw that actually the loss curve was practically the same. So using 3 different infrastructures with 3 different frameworks, we made sure that the trainings were compatible. It was very important that we could compare models trained on one infrastructure against the other, because we didn't have enough time to do this in one of the single infrastructures. The training phases were as expected. We have the pre-training phase, for which we train on the base dataset, the extended dataset, both from scratch, but also from the pre-existing weights of a Mistral model, just to compare the performance, if it gets better or worse than the pre-trained Mistral. And then we also do some continuous pre-training on these ablations that I mentioned before. We were not able to create complete corpora just by subtracting these ablations, which would have been great, but we didn't have enough time. So what we did was just continual training with the idea of actually boosting the impact of these materials in the final resulting model. And after that, we added another section of instruction tuning. We gather a set of, I think it was 7,000 instruction pairs manually created and crafted by Norwegian native speakers. And then we also train some of these models on these instruction tuning sets, just to see if the performance is getting better or not. We split this in blocks, and then we gave all the models different names, and each institution was in charge of training one of these blocks with LTG and NTNU, which has the University of Oslo and the University Technical in Trondheim, training also the pre-trained models, the from scratch and also the ones from pre-existing. The ablations were all based on the models trained from scratch. So we could single out the reasons, because when you train on Mistral, you don't know what Mistral has been trained on because you don't have that information. So in order to exclude possible problems with that, we just decided to train on the data that we have full control of. For the evaluation, that was actually kind of a nightmare because there isn't enough evaluation data sets for Norwegian. The ones we had were designed for encoder-only models, or they were coming from computational linguistics studies. So they have kind of a different way of working. They had a different target, I would say. So we have to rework all of this. We actually spent, I think it was like 100,000 euros hiring students, going over the most commonly used data sets for English. And they soon discovered that, for example, there is a lot of useless things in those data sets, things that you cannot learn from, things that are not translatable, things that are of no interest to the Norwegian society or culture. For example, we don't want to learn about gallons and miles and yards. That's actually useless in the training of Norwegian model. So a lot of the effort went into actually crafting and creating new data sets for all of this. We gather 28 different data sets for very common natural language processing tasks. We did a few rounds of literature review to see which ones were actually the most commonly used ones. And then we grouped them into 9 higher level skills or capabilities. So we had data sets for sentiment analysis, to test also fairness and truthfulness, reading comprehensions, word knowledge, common sense reasoning, Norwegian syntax, which is very important, summarization, which really goes to the actual core of the use of the language, translation, and then we also have a linguistic analysis on the outputs of these models. The problem of doing evaluations like this is that you end up with a lot of scores, and sometimes you have different metrics. For all of these scores, you might have BLEU, but you also might have BERT score, and then you might have percentage likelihood for one, but also other kind of metric. And then it's really hard to decide on what metric to use. So we try to make good decisions there, but we ended up with over 2,000 scores after running the 17 models on these 9 higher level skills. We also ran the experiments. We repeated them up to 4 times. We also used different prompts, up to 2 or 3 different prompts. So we ended up having like 30 tables that look like this. It's really hard to see right now, but just to give you an idea of how really complicated it is when you run very comprehensive evaluation sets, evaluation suites on a huge number of models. There is no way you can capture all the nuances that are actually going on these tables. No matter how you aggregate this data, you're going to be losing some information, but you have to hope for the best. So we try not to average. So we are only averaging metric wise. So we only average between each of the different higher level skills. We only average when the tasks are using the same metrics. If one task has available different metrics, for example, here we are seeing the translation one, and then the generation, the evaluation suite was returning BLEU, CHRF, but also BERT score. So we picked one of them, and then we average them against all the other tasks using the same metric. And then after that, we just did a sum. We did the summation of all of those, and those are the numbers we are reporting. We did several different configurations just to make sure that we were not missing anything, and the general trends actually repeat. No matter how you do disaggregation, if you do average of the average or you pick out another different metric, the general trends still remain. You can also see here that we have a different number of shots for some of the data sets, not for all of them, but for some of them we had available up to 16 shots. So we can give it 16 examples to these generative models before you expect the model to give you a continuation for the task. And then here we decided to go with the number of shots that was reporting the best performance. That might not be exactly fair, but we wanted to make sure that we were not limiting only based on the amount of data that the model was seeing. If we had available 16 shots, we were using 16, if that was actually reporting the best results, which in most cases it makes the model perform better when you're given more examples to look at. This is one of the examples here. This is for common sense reasoning. This is the North Common Sense QA dataset that it was annotated under the supervision of the University of Oslo. Here, the idea is just to select one of the correct answers, right, given a question. This is saying something like, what has happened when you see a poster about a missing dog in a wall or something, and then it's option N, is gone, it needs water, it needs to, you need to take it for a walk, things like that. And then the correct answer, because in this case, for example, we were only measuring one single letter. We look at the we look at the log probabilities of the tokens representing the letters. There were possible options, right? There are many different ways you can do this evaluation. You can actually just look at the actual text and then do an exact matching or a fuzzy string matching, but we decided for some of the tasks to go that way, and then for others just to look at the log probabilities if there was more appropriate. So the results look a bit like this. So here we are trying to summarize almost everything we've done in one single plot. You will see that each of these higher level skills or capabilities are encoded using a color, and then we just run a summation for all of them, right? We make sure that actually the trends are all the same, no matter how you aggregate this data. Here, for example, you can see, if we ignore for a second the Mistral worm models, the models that we train starting from the existing Mistral weights, we see that extended is actually the one giving the best scores, especially over base, which is already indicating that including materials under copyright might make the model better. But it's true that extended was also trained with additional data from the internet, which included other languages, but also extra material for Norwegian, I think. But if you look, for example, the number 3 here, which is base plus news, we're also seeing that this is the second best score. So just adding newspapers is giving you the third best score. And the second best score is actually the non-fictional material, which we call the factual information. So here you only have the non-fiction books and the newspapers, and that's also giving the second best score. Actually, the difference in scores between the second best and the third best is very negligible. Problem is that no matter what you add to the base, newspapers, books, fiction, or whatever, when you train on top of Mistral, you get the models to perform way better. It wasn't possible for us to actually score higher than Mistral when we continually train Mistral on extended and base. But interestingly, the difference in performance between extended and base trained from scratch in relation to extended and base trained on Mistral gets smaller and smaller. For example, extended and base, the two first rows here, there is a difference of around 28 points. And then if you look at the bottom of the plot, you will see that the difference is only 2 points. So training on copyrighted material is important, yes, but when you train on pre-existing models, that difference gets smaller and smaller, which might also be pointing out at the fact that maybe Mistral use already copyrighted materials in the region as part of their training sets. In terms of the ablations, we can see here how the base model performs. There is lines specifying exactly which models are getting better and which models are actually getting worse. The idea here is that as you add new material, which is domain specific, like newspapers or fictional or whatever, the model should get better. And that's actually true for almost every ablation, except for the fiction books. When we add fiction to the base model, the performance is actually a bit worse. We plotted this in a different way. So we gather all the average gains that you get when you add this material per each of the different higher level tasks as we define, and then we saw that it is actually true. It's happening in general for in a very significant way for all these applications, that when you add only fiction, actually the performance of the model is worse than that of base. If you look at each of the different higher level tasks, you can see how these gains are actually usually very small for the fiction books, for sentiment analysis, for fairness and truthfulness, for reading comprehensions. Here, adding just books in general is actually making it worse. For reading comprehensions, no matter what you do, you are actually making the model perform worse. For word knowledge, adding fiction is no surprise, making the model actually perform worse. For common sense reasoning, when you add newspapers, the model gets really bad, which kind of makes sense. Shouldn't trust newspapers that much. And for summarization, all of the models perform worse than extended. For translation, newspapers really give them a boost, which was kind of surprising. We don't know if it's maybe because all the place names and people names that are there that are somehow artificially boosting these scores. We still need to look into the details of why this is happening specifically for newspapers. And then when you look at the specific skills for Norwegian language, you can see that fiction is performing not very good when compared to, for example, newspapers or factual information. But when you look at the variation and readability, the outputs of the model are the best when you only add fiction books. That is telling us something about the design choices we did when we created this evaluation. So we tried to go with all the most commonly used data sets out there in the field of NLP that were mostly borrowed for the way they are evaluating on English. But we came to the realization that all of these metrics are somehow designed around monetization of the model. So they are not putting any emphasis on how creative the models are. And we actually came to the realization that we don't have a way to even measure how creative a model is. This variation and readability is just a proxy of that sort of creativity. But I think that we need to put more effort into the way we measure creativity in these models, because it's not an easy task, and it's actually making us go for targets that might not be the final use that these models might have, right? Not everyone wants to use these models for translation only. Some people might use it for creative writing. So in that sense, we need a way to properly measure that as well. When we compare the base and extended models trained from scratch against the base and extended models trained from Mistral, we can see here that the difference in performance between base and extended trained from Mistral is actually very small, as I mentioned before, while the difference between the from scratch trained models is actually a bit bigger. Interestingly, when you further tune these models to follow instructions, you know that instruction tuning is kind of a way to make the models behave like they are in a conversation. They can be chat-like, they can be like like single turn conversations like instructions. So we don't have really good data sets for dialogue or multi-turn conversations in Norwegian yet. So this is the best we have at the moment. And we also discovered that when you add this kind of tuning, we were able to improve on the Mistral 7B base model that we use as a foundation. Here, the first highlighted in blue bar here, which is extended instruct, that's trained only on material we have control of, right? We know exactly what's in that training set. We have full control. We know exactly what kind of copyrighted material there is, and we also have full control of the instruction set used. And then you compare that score to the bottom plot here, which is the Mistral, and then you see that extended instruct is actually performing a bit better than Mistral. So that's one of the only cases in which we are able to actually improve over a pre-existing model for which we don't know nothing about their training set. And again, as you add more domain-specific material on top of warm models, in this case, when you train from pre-existing weights, you can see that the difference in performance is actually minimal. If you compare the extended warm instruct against the base warm instruct, you see that they're actually scoring almost exactly the same. Better than any of the other models, but exactly the same. So when you are continually pre-training from a model that already has weights, and then you train on instruction following material, the addition of copyrighted material in the terms of books and newspapers is actually making no difference at all. In Norwegian, there is also two different written languages. So even though there is only one way to speak, well, that is not technically true. There are many, many, many dialects, which can be grouped in like 5 or 6 bigger regions. But when you write them in text, you can either choose the Bokmål written form or the Nynorsk written form. Usually the ratio of this is like 5-to-1, if I'm being generous. So we were a bit concerned about how well this model were performing for Nynorsk, which is usually underrepresented in all of these corpora. And we saw that, yes, it is a bit worse because we had some tasks for which we have already separated the Bokmål written form to the Nynorsk written form. So we only focus on the scores of those tasks and then made an average. And then we saw that usually Bokmål performs a bit better, but the Nynorsk performance is actually there. It's not performing significantly worse than Bokmål. So to conclude, I think that it's kind of almost safe to say that there is some empirical evidence supporting the idea that adding material under copyright in the form of books and newspapers actually makes the models perform a bit better. To a large extent, this effect seems to be mediated by the factual or non-fictional content. We also see some signs that warm starting models, that is pre-training for models like Mistral, usually give the best results, while reducing the impact that these materials might have on performance. And also, when you add instruction tuning data, this consistently increases the performance of all the models. And this is important because it's regardless of the pre-training data that they have seen in the pre-training phase. So what are the consequences of this study? Well, first, we inform all the negotiations that the National Library is having with the Ministry of Culture and also the right holders organizations. We got acknowledged at the government level, and thankfully enough, we actually got funding for creating a new unit specifically dedicated for language modeling, and the National Library is going to be like the central actor organizing all the activity around the development of language modeling. We need to staff 20 new people dedicated to everything AI, from system level to data sets to training, speech modalities, and all of that. We are getting finally some proper in-house hardware in the form of a few DG access. And we're also now part of the digital strategy of the country and the budget lines for 2025 to 2030. And also, if you have any question, I would be happy to take them. And of course, we are hiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Thanks a lot. I think it has been quite impressive, the work that you have been done. And I think the project has been quite successful, and I think the Norwegian government has already set up has decided to set up a new larger lab for large language models. So I think it's important. And if you are hiring, it's even more interesting. So for the audience also. So thank you very much for your presentation. I think it has been very clear. And there is now time for questions. So and if you have questions, just raise your hand and or maybe open your mic or just chat in the chat channel. So whenever you like, you can make any question. But if people doesn't have, I have a question. So sure. At the end, the main question at the beginning was, which was the value of the copyrighted material when creating these large language models. Apparently, it seems that if you can take, for instance, an instruction, you can instruct a model, just a base model, you can instruct the model, then the value of the copyrighted material is not that big. And also, if you already perform continual pre-training on an already pre-trained model like Mistral, for instance, this is also reducing the value of the copyrighted material. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the case. And I'm sorry, that was a question.
Yeah. The question is if this was right. I mean, it was correct, my interpretation of the results that the Mímir Project has already presented to the Norwegian government.
Yeah, that's one of the main conclusions we draw from this study. But I think that it's important to frame this in a national level, especially in the European Union, where we have now the AI Act, and we have the different risk and the different categories, and then there's not going to be an easy way to enforce any of that, but at some point, all of those directives are going to be transposed into law. Norway is usually one of the first adopters of all of this. When we want to use language models as a national strategy, for example, in the military, we are not thinking about using OpenAI or Anthropic. We're thinking about using our custom-built models in the country, in-house, for which we have full control. So it's very important to see that when supplementing these materials with instruction, for example, we can actually reach levels that are very close to these other privately trained models like Mistral or Gamma. So for the final user, obviously, they're going to go continually pre-training on Mistral, Gamma, or whatever, because they want to get the best performing model. But when you think from a strategy point of view, it's actually very useful information to have.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. And then, well, at the beginning, it was you said in November 2023 that the copyright holders decided to ask for compensation. So to the Norwegian government. So which has been the result of that project? Then the copyright holders still ask for money. I mean, for any kind of compensation for this. Do you know?
Yeah, I am fortunately not involved in the negotiations. I heard that they are quite tense. And they have been meetings. They have been having meetings for 6 months now, so they're not easy. But the last news I have is that they are reaching some sort of agreement between the parts by which there will be some sort of compensation, probably paid yearly. In the end, all of this is about money. So if you use material that other people actually make their living out of, you need to compensate them. That's clear. The question is more like how much for how long, and who's paying that money. So it seems like now the government is actually going to have a specific budget line for that. It'll come probably from the Ministry of Culture. It will not come from the National Library of Norway. And hopefully, after the compensation scheme is in place, we can actually release all of these models with a permissive license, which is the final objective that we have in the lab.
Okay, it's I think it's super interesting the results of this project. Also, as you said, for the rest of European initiatives that already are taking place in all Europe, developing large language models for other languages, and also extending also for the national languages we have in Europe, and also for the whole ecosystem here we have in Europe for developing large language models. So this is super interesting, I think, a good lesson, I think. We also here, as far as I know, in Spain, we also have, these days has been presented a law for collective licenses, so having this kind of umbrella for those copyright holders, so for representing them all and asking for a kind of compensation for this. So it's also, well, I think it's progressing slowly. I mean, in all countries, I think, but the evidence says that we have the way we are doing, I think, is good for arriving these kinds of mechanisms for solving all these issues with the copyright holders, and also the innovation and new technology we are I think developing, which is I think it's good for everybody. So thanks a lot for these explanations. I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to make any questions to Javier. People is a little bit shy today.
Maybe I spoke too fast. Apologies for that.
No, I think the presentation was very clear. So that's maybe that's why there is no further questions. Yep, I think there is one. No, just talk. Okay. So I don't know. No more questions. That's a pity. We have a good plenty of time, at least 6 minutes more, a little bit more maybe. So you have.
Yes, if I can add something to your comment, Herman. Copynur is the right holders organization of the editorial houses in Norway. The equivalent in Spain would be Cedro, which is housed in Madrid and Barcelona. And I have we've had conversations about this project already, right? So in the end, it's all about money. But we also need to bear in mind that it's very different situations. We're only 7 million people in Norway. So a compensation scheme might probably be fair. But the amount of money you have to spend in Spain to properly compensate many thousands of authors is way beyond the numbers we are dealing with in Norway, right? If an author in the end gets only like a couple of euros per book, they're going to opt out of any of these training sets, right? So the compensation needs to be rethought in terms of the dimensions and volume in Spain, I think.
Yeah, of course. I think it will be interesting to have this kind of studies for the rest of languages, and also, I mean, trying to replicate this for many other countries. I mean, it will be nice to know exactly the value of the copyright protected material for the rest of languages, which could be also provide some light on which now we don't know exactly which is the value of the copyrighted material. So I think this can help everybody, I think, the whole community, to know exactly the value of the language, for if they see providing, obviously they will provide. But as far as your example suggests, it may be the case that maybe it's not that much also for the case of copyrighted material. So let's see. I don't know. Nobody knows, I think, until making the exercise, no, the whole exercise. I don't know how much your project cost. I mean, the Mímir project. How much funded money it was provided for making this project?
That's funny you should ask. We got zero funding.
Zero funding, only. Okay.
We got zero funding. We got a mandate from the project. It was all based on the goodwilling from the different organizations. Okay. It was actually astounding to see how committed everyone was. And they put their own projects aside because the government mandated this, and they chose to work with us, right? They were not enforced to work. They chose to work with us because they thought that actually the project was interesting enough. So we have a few PhD students, postdocs, a couple of professors from institution, all devoting their time basically for free. The same goes for the training infrastructure. The equivalent of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center in the Nordic countries also provided us with, I think it was like 500,000 hours of GPU compute to do, all these are 7 billion models. They are not super massive, but they are not small. So they take time to train, especially from scratch. And then you have all the evaluations, all the failed trainings, all of that, right? So we are very thankful that everyone actually got really committed to the success of this project.
Yeah, and also 6 months only, which is quite small.
Yeah, it was kind of intense, I have to say.
So good. Okay, so I don't know if there is anybody that wants to make any questions here. I think the topic has been, for me, I learned a lot, and I like it a lot. I mean, at least for me. So I really appreciate your presentation. I don't know if somebody else wants to make any comment or suggestion. No?
There is also a publication coming out of this. It's accepted in Odalida, which is like the Nordic Zeppelin, and it's accepted as an oral. So probably I will put something on archive by the end of the week or early next week.
Okay. So thank you very much. I will now make the final presentation. If nobody wants to make any further question or comment. Yep. So sorry, I don't know if I'm presenting already. No.
Yep. I can see your screen.
Okay. Thanks. So this, thank you. So thank you very much. This is the final moments of this presentation, this webinar. The next presentation is going to be the next year on January 13 with Ekaterina Shutova. So we wait for you. I mean, we hope that everybody will come, and we will also make these announcements for the topic and the title of the presentation, etc. So just to give you, we have been very I mean, we have been very interested on your presentation, Javier. It has been very interesting for us, and we learned something that we didn't know about before. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you next time. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll see you all. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.